Today, I want to tell you a story. It's not a grand epic, but a quiet, personal account, a search for an answer to one of the most important questions I think we can ask. How do we actually build societies that work for everyone? This is my story. It's a journey that winds through my own life, through the puzzles about human behavior that have always fascinated me, and the frameworks I've had to build just to try and make sense of it all. It's a story about curiosity, yes, but also about a kind of practical stubbornness, an attempt to design systems that might, just might, favor the common good. And at the heart of everything, really, is this one single question. It's the question that has shaped my entire life's work. Why is it that some societies, some systems, just seem to function so well, while others, well, despite all the good intentions, they seem to fall back into the same patterns of distrust and failure time and time again? Now, my journey to answer this didn't start in a university library or a lecture hall. No, it began on construction sites and in the back offices of small businesses, places where the real rules of life are written, not in theory, but in practice. My professional life, well, it wasn't exactly a straight line. I started out as an engineering draftsman. Then I became a quantity surveyor, and eventually I earned a master's in innovation management. You see, each step gave me a completely different lens to look at the world, taking me from the hard concrete lines of a blueprint to the much more complex, fluid systems that drive our economies. On top of that, I've lived in 4 different countries, and in doing so, I got to directly experience 10 different systems of governance, up close. And what I saw, sometimes quite starkly, was that some systems just worked better. And it wasn't just about money or wealth. It was something deeper. Their underlying architecture, their moral and institutional DNA was just different. And that right there is the crucial point. The insights that kickstarted this whole quest for me, they didn't come from reading academic papers. They were born from the friction of reality, from watching projects succeed or fail based on something you can't see on a balance sheet, the invisible currency of trust. Eventually, just observing from the outside wasn't enough. I felt this pull to move from observation to participation. So I made a decision that, I'll admit, a lot of people found pretty strange. It was a deliberate choice to trade comfort for a much, much deeper kind of understanding. So here's the choice I faced. On the one hand, I could have stayed on the path I was on. A really lucrative career in the Gulf, 6-figure salaries, big projects, the common path, you could say. But I chose the other path, to return to my home country of Sri Lanka and build a small business from scratch, with almost no capital, just like the vast majority of my fellow citizens have to. So the obvious question is, why? Why trade that kind of stability for what was guaranteed to be a struggle? Well, it wasn't about being an entrepreneur in the usual sense. It was a research strategy. I needed to build what I call a living laboratory. I wanted to experience firsthand how the system feels for a small enterprise. I wanted to see exactly how policies, how incentives, how all the day-to-day struggles actually shape behavior, how they either build up trust or slowly erode it. This was my way of gathering data from the inside out. So, armed with all this practical, hard-won experience, I wanted to formalize it. I wanted to structure my research. But I found out pretty quickly that the existing roads, the conventional academic paths, they didn't seem to lead where I needed to go. They couldn't get to the kind of deep systemic understanding I was looking for. I did attempt a PhD, but the reason it didn't work out, it wasn't a lack of funding, and it wasn't a lack of capacity. It was an impasse. I found that the rigid, often outdated structures of academic research just weren't built for the kind of disruptive, system-level thinking I was trying to do. Ironically, the very system that claimed to seek innovation was punishing it. But, hitting that wall didn't stop me. In fact, it did the opposite. It forced me to forge my own path. I realized if the existing tools couldn't measure or explain what I was seeing, then I'd just have to create my own. I had to build my own frameworks to see the unseen forces that were so clearly at play. Because I kept seeing the same patterns of failure over and over again, and they demanded new ways of thinking. Things like school labs filled with expensive, unused equipment just locked away because nobody trusted anyone else with it. Or small business loan programs completely crippled by mutual distrust. Or public goods being vandalized because the underlying ethical norms had just worn away. These weren't random events. They were symptoms of a much deeper problem. It was from cataloging all these patterns, these symptoms, that my own models finally started to emerge. I began to see society not just as an economy or a political system, but as something more organic, something more alive.
This led me to develop the TEF-PIR framework. Now, the core idea is actually pretty simple, but it's powerful. I want you to think of a society as a living organism. And just like any organism, to be healthy, it needs two critical systems to function properly: a nervous system and a circulatory system.
So let's break that down. The TEF variables, that's trust and ethics, they act as the nervous system. They are the sensors and coordinators. They allow the society to feel, to react, to learn. Then you have the PIR variables, policy, incentives, and resources. That's the circulatory system. These are the tools that move and distribute everything, from money to opportunities. And for a society to be healthy, you need both of these systems working in perfect harmony.
But even a healthy organism needs a way to make good decisions. It needs direction. And I realized a key piece was still missing, a way to correct for the deep structural inequalities that prevent a system from ever being truly healthy. A society needs a kind of brain, an architecture for fairness. This is what I call the Rigid Probabilistic Governance Model, or RPGM.
The RPGM architecture has three main layers. First, something called probabilistic equalization. It's really just a mechanism to help rebalance the odds for ordinary citizens who start out with a systemic disadvantage. Second, you have ethical filters, which are designed to make sure major decisions are screened for fairness before they're implemented. And third, a permanent citizens' council, a rotating body of regular people designed to reduce the risk of powerful elites capturing the system. It gives disadvantaged voices a real seat at the table.
So, where does this tale end? Well, it doesn't. This work, these frameworks, they aren't meant to be a final answer. Not at all. They're really just the beginning of a whole new phase of the journey. And here is the core design principle that drives all of this work. See, systems that reward bad behavior will just keep producing it. So the central engineering challenge of our time is this: how do we design systems that make the good path the easiest path? So what I'm offering here is a disciplined, evidence-seeking path. It's a series of iterative experiments. A small business trying to demonstrate ethical practices, pilot programs to test these frameworks, and just a constant, humble search for what actually works to improve ordinary lives. And so I'll leave you with this. I certainly don't claim to have solved these grand puzzles. But if you've listened to this story, and if you feel its urgency, then the question is no longer just mine, it's ours. How will you contribute to building a better architecture of trust? Thank you for joining me on this journey.